I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right.
Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. We're here with one of our favorite guests, John Veldhuis.
You say that to everyone, because I just listened to the one with Heilprin,
Oh, no.
too, so I know you're just saying this.
Oh, no, you listened to my last one. I was afraid you did.
Yeah,
but
of course.
But you really are one of our favorite guests. You really are. John Veldhuis from Badger Blitz.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Well, John, we just got finished up with another Tuesday morning practice that was cold and windy, even though yesterday it was like 80 degrees.
Yeah, I mean, we were out, like 7 minutes before the advertised end time, so that was a change of pace.
Yeah, definitely. It was the shortest open practice they've had so far. So we're only got one more practice left. We've seen 7 of their 13 practices so far. The other 6 have been closed. I think I'm adding that up right.
That's right.
But we're getting to the end of spring here. Nothing has really changed with the quarterbacks. Jack Cohn is still taking all the first team reps, and the other 3 guys are split pretty evenly after that. I've talked about the quarterbacks on the last 2 podcasts. But after seeing most of spring, how do you kind of see this playing out in the fall? Do you have a sense of, do you think Jack Cohn is just going to kind of hold on to this job? Do you think that, does anyone else stand out to you as someone who could potentially challenge him?
I think in the practices that we've seen, and that I think that has complicated it a little bit just because we've only seen half of the practices. I mean, like the last couple springs we've seen basically all of them for the most part, and so it's hard to say because we haven't seen what's been going on in the closed practices. But in what we have seen, it's been, I think, pretty consistent in that Jack Cohn is for the moment the number one guy. He's getting the most reps. All of his reps are with the ones, and so from what we can see, my feeling is that he's going to enter fall camp as the front runner for the job. I think it's going to take a pretty strong performance from somebody else in fall camp to dislodge him from that starting spot. I mean, I think especially because say it's Graham Mertz, and I think I agree with other people when I say that if it's going to be somebody else other than Jack Cohn, I think it would probably be Graham Mertz, just because he's had some good moments in the practices that we've seen. He's got the physical tools that you like, and it seems like he's for a true freshman that's coming into spring camp, he seems to have a pretty good grasp on what players are asking him to do and things like that. But I think it's going to take a pretty impressive fall camp performance for Graham Mertz to say open the year as the starting quarterback. I think even if you get to the point where Jack Cohn and somebody else are evenly ranked, then I think you give the nod to Jack Cohn just because he has the experience. You're going to you're opening this the first game of 2019 at USF on the road, and I feel like that is a pretty significant edge that Jack Cohn has just in terms of in-game experience. We've seen some good things from him, specifically in the Purdue game I'm thinking of, and playing in games that count, and doing all this stuff. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is that Jack Cohn is the favorite. I think he is going to remain the favorite at the end of spring camp. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody were to come in, specifically Graham Mertz. We don't want to beat around the bush here. I mean, I think if it's going to be anybody, it'll be Mertz. But it's going to take a pretty strong effort, I think, to move Jack Cohn off of that number one spot.
Yeah, I think part of that reason, for me at least, and I think I mentioned this on last week's podcast, but I've been pretty impressed with Cohn this spring. I think he's looked pretty good. He's looked confident. His throws are sharp. He seems to be. He seems to just be having a really accurate spring, and I just think that no matter who starts, I would expect the quarterback play to be better this year. Now, I don't know, how much better, we'll see, but I think that was a big issue last year for this team and for this offense. And again, it's just 7 spring practices. This could all change in the fall. It could be, right. We don't really know exactly how this team's going to look or how this offense is going to look, but do you get a sense from just watching these guys practice that that the offense or the quarterback play, at least in general, will probably be better than we saw last year?
I think so. I think it has a good chance to. It's hard, to compare this year to last year just because, last year you were playing with, Alex Hornibrook for half of the season, and you're throwing Jack Cohn into the fire. And so, at this point, everybody's healthy, at this point in the spring. Jack Cohn is not a newbie anymore. I mean, he's got those 5 games, I think it is, under his belt as far as getting significant playing time, and so that's not nothing. And I agree with you that I think Cohn has looked pretty good. He in a sense he reminds me in the way I used to think about watching Alex Hornibrook over the last couple springs, is that he's the established guy, he's the vet, he knows what he's doing when he's out there, and that's a pretty big edge to have. And I think something that he has an edge in that some of the younger guys just it's going to take time for them to build up, is just the chemistry with the wide receivers when they're out there. I think in the last couple practices in particular, Cohn has showed a pretty good connection or a feel for where specifically AJ Taylor is going to be, and that just comes with being around each other for a couple of years or so, and it takes time to kind of develop that almost instinctual feeling for where guys are going to be on their routes and what the timing is like. And it's going to take time for specifically, say, somebody like a Graham Mertz who's in his first spring to to really figure that out and get the timing down, get to a point where you have that same kind of chemistry.
Yeah. If you when you look at this roster, what kind of worries you the most? I mean, you have an offensive line that's replacing 4 starters, but they have some depth there. They have some talent waiting in the wings. You have a team that didn't really get a whole lot of pass rush last year, and they got to replace some linebackers. Is there anything in particular, that maybe worries you more than other things on this team right now? Just sort of maybe an unanswered question that maybe in the fall we need to learn more about.
I think one that jumps out to me is that I don't know how much we've learned, just from us in watching practices and watching a couple of them, not the full spring. I don't know how much more we know about, what their best combination at cornerback is right now. I mean, I feel like it's probably still going to be Caesar Williams and Faion Hicks, and then obviously, when healthy, Madison Cohn is kind of your slot man in there. But they've done a lot of mixing and matching. There are times where it feels to me like there's a lot of guys that I think could be in the mix there, but we don't have a lot of clarity on that yet. And I feel like that's interesting, considering we were kind of in this same spot last spring, in that they were looking for 2 new starters to take over for Derek Tyndall and Nick Nelson. It did for the most part, and injuries and other health reasons kind of played into this too. But for the most part, it was Faion Hicks and Caesar Williams last year. But I would be looking to see in the fall if somebody can really grab one or both of those jobs and just run away with it. I think that's kind of what you want to see, is some guys that really establish themselves, especially after getting a full season's worth of reps in there. And that's not to say that they've played bad in the spring or anything like that. I think the defensive backs in general, I think, are getting their hands on the ball a little bit more than what we've seen last season or over the last couple preseason camps. But I'm just looking for a little bit more clarity there, because I think the Badgers struggled to make some impact plays on defense last year, and I think that's a combination thing. It's you're working with young defensive backs. Pass rush was not great. Your defensive line was sapped of a lot of depth, and so all of those things are really kind of working together. And if you're gonna get a step forward from the defensive line, and maybe you found a little bit more depth at in your pass rushers at outside linebacker to make the full thing come together and really work, you need those experienced defensive backs to hold on in coverage to give your pass rushers or your defensive line time to make plays up in the front. And so I think that's kind of an all interconnected group, and I want to see a little bit more from that group in the fall. I want to see if somebody can really kind of establish themselves as kind of the guy or the guys on the first team at the corner.
Yeah, and am not necessarily worried about the cornerback spot. I don't think you are either, but it's one of the most interesting spots to watch
For sure.
This spring, because it's one of those where they just keep rotating a bunch of guys in and out. A lot of different guys have taken first team reps,
and they have a lot of different guys with different skill sets too. I mean, you have some bigger corners. You have some guys that are a little bit smaller, but they have the athleticism and the quickness to play out in space and do all that kind of thing. So I'll be very interested to see the rep distribution when we get to the regular season, and see how Jim Letter kind of plays matchups if he wants to, or if he can develop some guys that he feels like you can leave out there for most of the snaps of a game.
Yeah, one of the funny things about you mentioned last year they were kind of doing this too is I think I could be off on the numbers, but I think there were 6 different guys that took first team reps at some point I
think that's right.
last fall, and Rashad Wildgoose was not one of them, and he ended up starting a lot of games for them. So it's crazy how deep they are at that position, and I think another interesting thing about that is they have been playing a lot more guys in the slot. They've been rotating a lot of guys in there. Last year was pretty much at the beginning of the year it was basically just Madison Cone there, and then Rashad Wildgoose started playing there as well. But now they're throwing, I've seen Caesar Williams take a few reps in the slot. Alex Smith has been in there a little bit. Mm-hmm. Maybe somebody else I'm not thinking of, but maybe part of that's too because Madison Cone hasn't really been practicing.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a good opportunity. Not that the Badgers want anybody to not be available and be on the field, but that's one of the upsides or the silver lining of having a guy like Madison Cone not being able to do a whole lot in the spring is that it forces you to put other guys out there and to kind of learn how to play that interesting position, which is the slot corner. I mean, like it's not like playing one of the outside or boundary corner spots, just because when you're playing the outside you have basically the sideline there to help you in a sense as kind of another defender if you can kind of pin somebody over in that section. But when you're playing in the slot, you're much more out in space. You're exposed if you don't have that athleticism to play that, and so it's good to have guys that can have some of those practice reps to fall back on, especially if you get to a point where you say Madison Cone is out or injured for a game or something like that. You want to have some depth there, especially since so many teams now are going to be running 3 or more wide receiver sets. It's not like everybody's playing the old ground and pound Big Ten offenses anymore.
Yeah, and the nickel spot is really a starter.
Basically,
these days. And I remember looking at the stats a couple of years ago. I got hold of snap counts for the whole season, and I think Dante Kira-Williams, when he was the number 3 corner, he played more snaps during the 2017 season than Olive Sangapolu did.
Right.
Just because you're a nickel more often than you are the base, and I thought that was just an interesting kind of tidbit from looking at those. And it's people don't view the third corner as a starter, so to speak, but really 3 guys, whoever's in that slot is really out there a lot more than.
And we've seen the Badgers do a lot of work in their nickel package in the practices that we've been able to see. I mean, it's an emphasis for everybody, and so it's it's not something that you can just shove to the side and hope that you can figure it out when the actual season comes around.
Is there a specific player that's just sort of intrigued you this spring? I think a couple people that stand out for me. Brady Shipper has been a little eye-opening. He's a guy that looks in the mold of a Garrett Groshek who can play on third down. I don't know what kind of pass protection skills he has. I haven't really seen a whole lot of that yet. But he's a guy that looks like he's going to play at some point during his career here, a walk-on. Colin Wilder is just interesting. The Houston transfer, first time really seeing him. Another guy that's kind of stood out to me. It looks like he's going to be a second-team guy. Is there anybody in particular for you that just maybe you wasn't really on your radar this spring, but after watching a few practices, you're like kind of starting to watch this guy a little more?
Yeah, maybe the last couple practices. It was a guy we just got done hearing from Paul at the end of this practice, but he brought him up right away. Was Isaiah Green May at outside linebacker. He's still what is he? Is he gonna be a sophomore this year?
Yeah, I think a redshirt sophomore.
So he's still a little light for that outside linebacker position. You'd like to see him with his frame. You'd like to see him put on, probably maybe another 15 or 20 pounds or so. I mean, depending on the position they want him to play, or do they want him playing in space or anything like that. But for his frame, he still seems a little light. But man, like the last couple practices, in particular, I'm thinking of the Friday night one. I think he had a good couple. Got his hands on a couple balls from the Walling pass rush. He's had a couple sacks, quote unquote, just because there's not always live contact on quarterbacks. But for a team that's looking to boost the pass rush in particular after losing some of their key defensive pieces, I don't know that he's kind of been getting regular second team reps and then maybe some first team reps in that nickel package. But he's a guy that seems to be kind of figuring out what he can do. And he was an early enrollee too a couple of years ago, so this is going to be I think this is his third spring now, and so it might just be that time where he's had enough experience in the program where he's getting to a point where he can help out, and this is a good time to for him to step up. I mean, Noah Burks has been getting the other first team reps alongside Zach Bond, and Burks is a pretty highly recruited, highly ranked guy coming out of high school. I believe Rivals had him as a 4-star guy, and so there's some interesting pieces in that outside linebacker pipeline. I'm curious to see how it all shakes out, but Green Bay is definitely the guy that over the last probably week and a half has stood out to me the most.
I'm glad you brought him up because he has taken some first team reps over Noah Burks. I mean, Noah Burks has taken the bulk of those, but it's because outside linebacker is one of those spots. I mean, really, there's outside of cornerback, it's really the only other spot where there's real competition for a starting spot that I can think of right now. So I think it's one of those positions where I think that the group could have played better than they did last year. They weren't maybe as disciplined as you would have liked, and the pass rush wasn't there. And obviously,
played a part of that too.
Definitely. I mean, Van Ginkel's injury definitely hurt them there, and Jim Leonard mentioned the other day that Zach Bond wasn't completely healthy last year either. Although I think Bond started playing really well toward the end of the year.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But just looking at that group, it's basically Bond and then a bunch of guys that haven't played much. And Burks, I remember Burks getting thrown in there. I think it was the drive after Van Ginkel got hurt against BYU. I think BYU had a really long run. Really the next drive after that, and Burks was the guy that kind of got flushed out of position, and there's just going to be a lot of guys there that haven't really had the same experience, and it's one of those spots where I asked you earlier, what kind of worries should we have with this team? I think that's one of the spots where you kind of have to wonder what you're going to get out of the other person opposite Bond, whether it is Burks or Green May or Tyler Johnson, and Jalen Franklin has gotten some good second team work as well. So they have a lot of. It's intriguing because they have a lot of candidates there with potential.
Right.
It's just a matter of if one of those guys is going to step up and become a really good player this year or not.
And it's unfortunate for a guy like Christian Bell that he's missed this spring because he and I believe it was Tyler Johnson would have been your second team outside linebackers last year, if I'm remembering snap counts correctly. And so this is a tough spring for him to have to miss with the injury that he had. I believe it was either in bowl prep or at the end of the season. Just because you would have wanted to get him, some reps either with that first or second team. We don't know where he would have slotted in. Were he healthy to go for the spring? Like, would he be with Bond on that, on the other side of there? Would he be with the second team? Tough to say. But when there's that opportunity open opposite Zach Bond, it's an opportunity that for him to really show in fall camp what he can do, because he, in a sense, he'll have to play a little bit of catch up.
It's a spot that's kind of surprised me a little bit because I kind of thought Tyler Johnson was going to be the guy.
I thought so too.
He was a guy that played limited snaps in 2017. He had to fill in for some injured guys and played pretty well in games against, I think it was Indiana and Illinois, maybe.
That sounds right.
He had a couple game stretch there where he played really well and made some plays, and I kind of always liked him. I think one of my bowl predictions last year was that he was going to lead the team in sacks in our podcast we did. And I think he had 0, but he was dealing with some injuries last year too, and I just thought maybe coming in the spring he would kind of emerge as that guy. So it's
but he's been a second team outside linebacker. I mean, it's tough to say how any of this will shake out for the fall, but I kind of thought that he was gonna, with Bell out in particular, I thought it was gonna be him on the first team. So it was a surprise on day one, or I guess day one for us, to see him or to see Burks in that other spot instead of him.
Before I let you go here, general impressions of how you think the team is going to fare this year. I know we're many months away at this point. I've kind of been tinkering between 8-4 and 9-3. I think there's still a lot to be learned during fall camp before we really make our final predictions here. But do you have a sense of of is this team going to get back to, there's been a lot of preseason polls that have ranked this team in the top 15. That is really rich for me.
Yeah,
I can't really see that. But how do you kind of see this team shaping out at this point?
I think there's a good chance that the last 2 years, the Badgers have been kind of in the thick or on the periphery of the playoff discussion and all that goes with it. With them going undefeated in the regular season in 2017, coming in as a top 5-ish or so team before last year. I don't think that the depth is there to where they're going to get back to that this year. But I think there's a pretty good chance that they get back to kind of being I would say the average Wisconsin team, which is kind of what you're saying, kind of like 9-win, 10-win, range, somewhere in there. A lot of it depends on what they get from the quarterback and whoever that is. And I think the biggest key, just because I think there's enough similarities between the quarterbacks that I feel, not to say that they're interchangeable, but the big key for me is, does the defense get a little bit more back on track to what we got used to seeing from them over the last couple of years or so? Like, they don't need to be a top 5 or top 10 group, but better than top 50, which I think is kind of where they were at on average at the end of last year. Like, if they could get back to being like a top 25 unit, and have that defensive back, pass rush, and then stopping the run with the defensive line, if they could get back to kind of the average defense that we saw for a Wisconsin team over the last couple of years, I think they can get back to that level and still have a pretty successful season. But I'm not envisioning being on the periphery of any playoff talk this year.
Not picking them you're not ranking them number 1?
No. Not this year anyway. Maybe the year after that. Who knows?
Yeah, I do think that how I feel about the quarterbacks coming out of fall camp will be a big determining factor.
It's going to be a
and how I think this team is going to do
for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Thanks for joining me, John.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You can follow him on Twitter at John Veldhuis and read his stuff at badgerblitz.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway. And, of course, visit madison.com for all of your Badgers football news. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to The Red Zone on iTunes or Google Play. And we will do one more episode of The Red Zone during this spring. We're going to have a post-spring mailbag next week. So if you want to go ahead and tweet me questions for that, you can go ahead and do that. I'll also ask for them at some point later in the week or early next week. So enjoy your nice weather that's coming up. It's not very nice this morning for us, but it's
better than like 2 Saturdays ago. I'll take that.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it's yesterday felt like summer, so it's here. We're getting through it. But thanks for listening.